Hello, and welcome to the Global Executive Training and Development Association podcast with Dr. Kamal Ranasinghe. Today on Global Reflections, a preamble on considerations of the global arena.
Well, in answer to your question, and on the understanding that this is something of a preamble to all the podcasts that you are suggesting I might do, I suppose my thrust today is that nowhere is too far away. The world increasingly gets smaller. Today, in the world of international endeavor, the sort of international endeavor with which we are all girdled all about, the means with which to navigate our way through the minefield, which is in fact global activity, that should not just be an ephemeral philosophy. Neither, as is in the case put forth by far too many text gurus, neither is it just an esoteric branch of international business. Albeit burgeoning globalization has changed international business, and changed it in myriad ways, it is still not just a focused branch of international business. The increased demand of world goods has, I admit, driven the supply side of the equation, and has done so at an increasingly rapid speed. It does so to satisfy billions of customers. Within only a few years, the availability of new global markets has provided new opportunities to businesses all over the globe. I said businesses all over the globe, not businesses just in the Western Hemisphere. Many of these newly fortunate businesses were not even internationally involved just a few years ago. The point is that the kind of expert knowledge at the leadership strata necessary for global endeavor to global businesses to discern and to judge market assessment, that has grown to include political atmospheres, societal realities, racial issues, religious issues, cultural aspects of all the foreign environments within which we ply our worth today. We today have to consider strategic alliances. Anyway, just as I speak to the fact that it should not be just from a business perspective, in the global environment, global expertise, strategic expertise and insight and intuition, all of that is the thought process by which the guiding members of any truly ambitious global entity develop a vision of the future and define something akin to a roadmap to attain that future. Did I just mention strategy? Yes, I did, didn't I? Well, part of the problem when we juxtapose strategy with global is that far too often global executives allow strategy's offshoot, strategic planning, to equate with traditional long-term planning. The problem is that long-term planning is the buzzword of domestic operations. Long-term planning is merely an extrapolation of the current state of the organization. whatever that organization may be. Global endeavor, on the other hand, today involves the determined, careful, and most importantly, the consistent scanning of all the global horizons. Sometimes, in a professional setting, that scanning has to continue for as long as 5, 10, or even more years. And it's done with a view to protecting one's organizations from dramatic changes occurring overseas, which may have an impact upon the entity. For instance, if more global organizations, if more governments, if more government watchdog agencies had practiced the little dictum that I've just mentioned, all the recent crises all over the world, political, financial, and otherwise, probably wouldn't have crucified as many of them as it did. But now that I mention protection, I must evince a caveat. It isn't really only about protection. It isn't always about defending your organization or protecting your own national interests. Modern, expertly conceived global practice is also meant to provide its practitioners with opportunities to incorporate perceived benefits into the ongoing and future activities of their country, of their organization, of their entrepreneurial efforts. When an organization, when an organization or a section of a government or a state agency proposes to garner benefit from global activity, that proposal is usually conceived, and presumably it's eventually initiated, for the organization inevitably from the home base, the headquarters. The world, however, is often much, much more distant from the localized realities of the headquarters. It is almost guaranteed that any organization, as it moves into the international environment, will create satellites. It will establish units of itself in far-off locations. These will be functional units. Attachés, ambassadors, overseas manufacturing plants. It will establish those functional units of the organization, for instance, for particular lines of the government's business or services or an organization's efforts. In such circumstances, one of the shortfalls in all the current thinking espoused by those who think everything needs to emanate from the headquarters is that such outlying units today are so on the cusp of the constantly evolving changes taking place in their vicinity that they now need to have the authority to conduct swift strategic reviews of their specific environment and to do something about it. Obviously, while doing something about it, they have to keep the headquarters informed, of course. But they should have the authority to adjust to localized initiatives to garner the best advantage from those near daily changes that I mentioned a little earlier. The issue that comes up and we will talk about this in future podcasts, is that the process of initiating such thinking, and if that process is initiated with the home-based staff, the HQ staff and the leaders, then implementing such policy for global operational tactical planning, the leadership, that's often one of the major conceptual hurdles. I suppose what I'm saying is that it is vital. We must raise consciousness about this. In essence, today, Successful global practice needs to be able to maintain a very, very high level of professional endeavor, even whilst conducting those scans of the localized environment, the global horizons, for potential trouble spots. Trouble spots which might affect the organization or the individual entrepreneur's interests. The interests of a government going global, the state agency going global for the first time, the organization. My own thinking is that in today's global environment, the formula for success continues changing quite dramatically, day by day, hour by hour. I suppose the most pivotal change is that globally ambitious nation-states, globally ambitious organizations, and individual entrepreneurs must now take full and equal cognizance of the imperatives adhered to by the global constituents with which they interact. In essence today, it is not just a cavalier insouciant wandering off into the international arena in the sure and certain belief that that arena is waiting, cap in hand, with bated breath, for you to arrive and awe them. Today, intelligent, insightful, intuitive, global practitioners realize that intuition and insight has to be proffered from both sides. Today, these globally ambitious nation-states, organizations, individual entrepreneurial organizations, they share risks, certain types of risks, with all the overseas groups that they will encounter. They will be participating with these overseas groups. They will work with these overseas groups. This was not always so before. See, today, success in the global environment demands both excellent background training and awareness of our world, but also a strategic ability, a strategic policy of the organization, and the ability to execute that policy. All international organizations, all international governments, all internationally ambitious groupings, they who adhere to this process of excellence that I speak to, global excellence, they accrue value for themselves. If it's a government, they will accrue value for their citizens. If it's a profit-making entity, they will accrue value for their share owners. At the very heart, they will accrue value for all their customer constituencies, their citizens. Essentially, every ambitious global nation state, every organization, every individual entrepreneur, all of them with ambitions overseas, what I'm speaking to in all the podcasts that you're planning is that they need specialist support to succeed within the new societal, racial, national, cultural, religious environments. These are rapids and whitewaters. These are shoals that they have to navigate. This is particularly the case in emerging countries, in emerging markets, or markets where, for instance, the Western Hemisphere governments, Western Hemisphere organizations, entrepreneurs, where their operating ability, where their diplomatic ability is untried. I suppose I will not be saying anything too difficult to comprehend when I say that it is still exceedingly difficult, for instance, for American entities to manage human capital overseas, to handle human capital in host nations, different cultures, different religions, caste systems, regional and national imperatives. It's very difficult for many Western Hemisphere nations and organizations to negotiate with third world governments or to introduce themselves to any new land where they see an opportunity. In essence, they have a strong need for internationally expert leadership and the global strategic expertise which goes with it. They need this when making forays into emerging markets or parts of the world wherein their ability is untried. This is somewhat inevitable. This is somewhat inevitable as there are aspects of the way things are conducted in every one of the 200 plus sovereign nations on the planet, which are quite simply different from all that our leaders have been raised in and trained with. For instance, if we move away from governments and say focused on business, I trust everyone who is kindly watching will agree, or at least I hope they'll agree, that the traditional focus of most businesses, like those in the United States, for instance, most businesses in Western Hemisphere domestic environments, is inclined towards reducing costs and improving operational efficiencies. You can go into any bookstop and there are racks and racks of books on exactly how to do that, reducing costs and improving operational efficiencies. And that's wonderful. In nearly every one of the domestic work environments, that is almost the only part of the equation for creating benefits for a company. However, success today, especially when one is involved in the incredibly volatile global arena, lies in being much more prepared, much more aware, smarter and faster than all the competition. And by the very nature of publication, it rarely keeps up with the minute-by-minute changing realities of our global arena. Thus, for purposes of almost all global endeavor, I would suggest that a growth-oriented approach requires a fundamentally different behavior. For instance, today, going back to business again, if I may, business projects in the global environment are often much, much more complex than the traditional barter concept we think of when the words trade or trading come up. Instead, today, business endeavor in the global arena combines leading-edge technologies with process changes. Today, with the incredible advances of modern communications, the incredible advances that computer technology, communications, etc. have wrought, speed is of the essence. Is the home headquarter-based staff sufficiently fast to react to a sudden change on the other side of the world? Does it even care? But speed is, on its own, totally insufficient. All globally expert individuals must be steeped in awareness, give very careful attention to new processes and global organization factors. I hope that anyone watching will agree that all I have suggested, and I have just skimmed the surface of the vast panoply of myriad issues which arise when one goes global. I hope they'll agree that I've tried to indicate the near endless possibilities inherent in the most recent leading edge innovations that are taking place all about us, with stellar staff all over the world. You know, while I think about it, I suppose that all this might signal a new paradigm in the global environment wherein, for instance, international relations, global business occurs. If that is the case, it's my contention that winning organizations must now try to unleash the power of their globally trained, globally expert, globally ambitious people. Note, I said globally trained, globally expert, globally ambitious people, not just anyone. And they must do so to improve all of their international performance, which, of course, is where all these kind watches come in. Today's stunning communication and technology advances are changing the way that we have been taught. Are changing the way that most universities, by dint of their somewhat turgid curricula and syllabi, teach what they think is current global. Today's advances in communications, advances in technology, have changed the way that most globally successful entities and individuals view their strategic options. In the next few podcasts, I hope that what we will be able to do, if I'm allowed the honor of their company, that we will together contemplate and conceive and consider how to succeed in this new world.
On behalf of Dr. Ranasinghe and the Global Executive Training and Development Association, thank you for watching. Join us again for another episode of Global Reflections.